Now we're joined by Clint Henderson. He's the senior news editor with The Points Guy. And as always, he's here to answer some of your travel questions and explain the interesting reasons why U.S. carriers are seeing so many cancellations. Clint, do you think it would be fair to say that airlines should have seen this coming?
Well, I mean, it's hard to forecast a new variant of coronavirus. However, I think the airlines got ahead of themselves with scheduling and staffing levels. We did really well during Thanksgiving, not so many cancellations, but this new variant is just causing a mess. And as we predicted, if there's any kind of storm or anything, the dominoes start falling. So we saw that in Seattle, which is a major hub for airlines like Alaska and even Delta. And the storm's impact on that airport alone was disastrous for the rest of the network.
And we know that American Airlines offered incentives to employees to continue working through this busy holiday season. Do you think it would have made a difference for these other airlines if they had offered similar incentives?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, American has been the best performing of the airlines over the past Christmas holiday period. So maybe, but that said, with this Omicron variant circulating widely, there's so many sick calls. I mean, it's happening not only in the airline industry, but in airports and in hotels and healthcare workers also. So you're just having a lot of people getting sick right now, and there's worker shortages.
Yeah. And I know that airlines asked the CDC to cut COVID isolation days. It was at 10, now it's down to 5. And this was partially in the hope of addressing those staffing shortages that you mentioned. But I want to read to you what the chief medical officer from Delta said about this situation. He says it's a, quote, safe, science-based, and practical approach based on what we know about the Omicron variant. So has this had a positive impact on airlines, and how have flight attendants reacted to this isolation timeline change?
So the flight attendants union is not thrilled with this. And, it depends on which healthcare worker you're talking about. But the CDC did defend itself today and said, look, the amount of time that people who've had coronavirus are sick is 2 to 3 days before they come down with it, and then 2 to 3 days after. So maybe there is some justification for this, but certainly some flight attendants are not happy with this reduced quarantine requirement just because they don't want people working sick, which is understandable. At the same time, these airlines have to be able to operate.
And speaking of that, we've had a lot of questions in from our viewers asking if these cancellations just aren't going away as we head into the new year. What would you tell them about that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the news is not great on that front. I think we saw individual airlines have meltdowns earlier this year that they were able to recover from within 2 to 3 days. But this one has been going on for more than a week now. I just looked today, there's another 857 cancellations in the United States alone. We've seen that day after day after day, and it's every airline. It's not like it's just one airline that's having some issues. It's across the board. In fact, I recently looked at FlightAware, which is a tracking service, and now Dallas looks like it's having some issues with delays. So we'll have to see if there's a ripple effect. But there's another storm also forecast for Seattle. The Omicron variant is now the most predominant strain, or getting there, at least in the United States. So that's spreading like wildfire. So I don't see light at the end of the tunnel right now for this, at least through the new year when things slow down a little bit for the airlines.
Clint, you're breaking my heart here with this cancellation news moving forward. I mean, what can passengers do to kind of prepare to handle these inevitable issues?
So, at The Points Guy, we always say, have a backup plan. That's the most important thing. So what I always do is if I'm flying Delta, say from San Francisco to Bozeman, Montana, I'll check to see what other airlines are operating that route. So if one airline is having a meltdown, I can potentially ask them to switch me to another flight. So that's one idea. Use your miles to book flights right now, just because things are so up in the air, you're more likely to get your points back as opposed to cash refunds. So airline, call your airline, not only call your airline, reach out to them on social media, get in line at the customer service desk, go to the lounge. You got to have multiple touch points here for customer service because the phone lines are overwhelmed. So, do what you can to work around that. I've had a lot of good luck with direct messaging on Twitter to Alaska and to American Airlines have been great getting back to me and helping me change flights when I've had issues. But have a backup plan, have a place to stay just in case you get stuck somewhere. A lot of people are getting quoted wait times of up to 21 hours. So what you want to do if you're in that situation is you want to go ahead and book yourself a hotel room and then fight with the airline after the fact to try to get a refund because obviously you don't want to wait at the airport all day.
Right. I mean, that's a nightmare situation in many ways. I do want to get your take on some sanitation questions, too, because a Bloomberg News story out today is about the new aircraft cleaning requirements that could further impact these flight delays. China implemented new sanitation mandates due to COVID that take a lot longer to clean the planes, and airports are facing a shortage of workers that are really needed to carry out these steps. Is China setting the example here? And does this mean that we can expect, again, even more delays given these sanitation mandates?
Look, I think if you're traveling internationally, all bets are off. You have to be really flexible and you have to be really careful when traveling internationally just because the rules change all the time. This is a perfect example. American Airlines, not American Airlines, but American Airlines in general, including Delta, are in the middle of talking to the governments and trying to figure out a solution to this because I'm afraid if China keeps this policy in place, some of the airlines will say these flights are not worth operating anymore.
I think one thing, though, that when I read the story concerned me a tiny bit was that, I kind of like the idea of sanitation mandates. I want to have my cake and eat it, too. I want to have the cleanest, most safe possible flight, but I also don't want it to get canceled and delayed. Should passengers be worried that these flights aren't getting clean enough?
Well, I think most flights and the airlines will say that they're cleaning the planes very deeply at least once a day. And so it's not as big as an issue. Excuse me. I got a little frog in my throat.
No worries.
So the airlines insist that the planes are clean enough. And we've also learned that COVID is not really spreading on surfaces as much. So we don't really have the full details of what's going on here between the governments. But the good news is the Chinese and American governments are reportedly in talks about this. And I'm hopeful there'll be a solution because otherwise the airlines might just say, it's just not worth it. They already have to quarantine for 3 days in some of these countries. And it's just making the flight crews prohibitively expensive. So they just have, it's a balancing act.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Clint, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. As always, we really appreciate it. That was Clint Henderson, senior news editor with The Points Guy.